I even FOIA'd that agency who put me under criminal investigation, and I got a denial of my whole file, citing something called like a B7 alpha FOIA exemption, which means it could compromise a law enforcement investigation. But they wouldn't even give me anything, not even redacted papers. They just gave me a denial letter. And I'm like, okay, so you said I did something bad, which wasn't even true. You never interviewed me, and you were trying to use that information to fire me. That's crazy. And luckily, there is an open investigation to look at this kind of wrongdoing. And that's one of the reasons I went public. I'm a patriot. I shouldn't be treated like this.
Of course not.
If there was a sensitive program I uncovered, come to the table with me. Tell me, knock it off, Dave. Sign this piece of paper.
But where's everybody else? And where's everyone else been for the last 90 years?
I know.
This is so outrageous that it suggests to me that the threats, the ones you alluded to, are real. People are afraid of being hurt.
And luckily, people are coming out. So remember the DIA OSAP program I mentioned earlier. So a man named Dr. James Lakatsky ran it. He's a PhD level former DIA officer, now retired. So he wrote 2 books. One is called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. And on page 152 to 153, if anybody's watching and happens to have the book, you'll note that they talked about a sequestered technology and they were trying to get access to it. Well, that's what I just told you earlier in this interview is Harry Reid was literally trying to get them access to that technology. And people are like, oh, well, Harry was funding some paranormal program. They were looking at Skinwalker Ranch. It was some woo-woo thing. And I'm like, well, the real story is the $21 or $22 million appropriated was meant to set up material analysis equipment at a Bigelow Aerospace facility to look at the material that a clear defense contractor was supposed to transfer to them. But when that ended, they ended up doing other stuff with that money because, well, they wanted to study this phenomenon in some way, shape, or form. So they looked at some of the more, paranormal aspects, if you will. I've never been to Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, but, allegedly things are going on out there. And then they wrote these documents called Defense Intelligence Reference Documents in lieu of the core reason for that money. So a lot of naysayers in social media are like, oh, Harry Reid, he was just into the paranormal and he wanted to study, Skinwalker Ranch and ghosts. That's not entirely accurate. There was a real reason for it.
No, but I'm just saying what they're doing is what it sounds like they did to you, which is try to discredit you by calling you a nut.
Yeah, and 1 week after the congressional hearing, there was a hit piece on The Intercept. Somebody verbally tipped off that reporter, and he admitted it on an interview on The Hill. And he FOIA'd for some records that pointed towards, some, struggles I had several years ago where I, checked myself in because I was feeling depressed at a hospital. And, I'm not ashamed of that. A lot of veterans go through that. But it was very interesting. 1 week after the hearing, this hit piece comes out of The Intercept, killing the messenger, but not the message, saying I'm crazy, I have mental problems. And it was totally crazy.
Why would an Intercept reporter do that?
You would think, because weren't they pro-whistleblower? Didn't Glenn Greenwald create them to actually support whistleblowers?
Yes. And if some, high-level bureaucrat comes to you to, crush a subordinate, because he's revealing things that the public really has a right to know, you think the reporter says, well, actually, I want to hear more about the program. Like, what is this? Do you have UFOs or don't you?
Yeah, it's like, why don't you actually look into it? It's very lazy journalism, and there's very few investigative journalists, and I'm sure you know this, that even exist anymore.
Well, I'm very aware of it. And yes, I'm very aware of that. But I just want to get back to like the core of what's going on here. It doesn't actually add up. So the idea is that for 90 years, we've been collecting this stuff, monitoring it, studying it in order to improve military technology to give us an edge and ace in the hole, as you said. Okay.
Yeah, there were certainly good breakthroughs that I'm aware of that did help certain black programs that are conventional in nature.
I believe it.
And I understand that.
Can you be more detailed than any of that?
No, I can't.
Okay.
And a lot of those programs are still classified.
Right. Well, that's kind of the point I'm making. A lot of these programs are so old that no person participated in them is still alive.
No, that was the issue. Is I had to find some of the old timers before they died because there's a brain drain. There's a senior intelligence officer that's currently on the program that, told us that they struggle hiring even the right technical people because of the obtuse security. Imagine the best person in quantum gravity smokes marijuana. Are they getting a TS clearance? No. So they can't even bring in the right people. And once again, like you just said, a lot of the breakthroughs have not matriculated into civil society for the most part. And in an era of climate change and other things going on, and we can debate the genesis thereof, but this is the time to bring it out because it's going to take 20, 30 years to commercialize anything anyways.
But it does suggest that there's something more going on here. It suggests that the U.S. government, they've kept the Kennedy assassination files, thousands of pages classified for 60 years this month, because the CIA, of course, was in contact with Oswald and had knowledge of the conspiracy to kill Kennedy. I'm not speculating. I talked to someone who read the documents. So they have hidden those documents in order to protect themselves from public scrutiny of their own illegal, immoral behavior. I'm kind of be surprised if something similar is not going on here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a famous quote. There's a John Stossel interview where he interviews Mike Pompeo about 2 or 3 years ago where, interesting, he makes a weird, very odd in sequitur after he discusses the JFK files, ironically, and he says, if I get this quote correctly, I've seen the UFO file, we have bigger problems, is what the former CIA director says to John Stossel in a taped interview. And if you even go back, most people don't know this, there's a taped interview from Senator Barry Goldwater in the late 80s. He was famously a 2-star general in the Air Force Reserve, but of Goldwater Nickelsack famed in the 80s. And there's an interview of him, which you can YouTube if you like, that he phoned General Curtis LeMay many years ago and asked, hey, I heard there's a room where you keep all this UFO material. Can I have access? And General LeMay basically chewed out Senator Goldwater, who was, I think, Gang of 8 member at the time, and denied him access. So there's something wrong when, certain people like that try to dig into it.
But there's a reason that they're keeping it secret.
There may be other reasons. I don't claim to be omnipotent and know all the issues, and that's why I'm not here to disclose. This should be the President of the United States and his cabinet, because there may be issues that I'm not even aware of that may precipitate a certain form of acknowledgement or disclosure. I do agree. There is probably something darker and deeper and more disturbing. And I did see inklings of that when I did interview so many people of high caliber.
So what is the truth about these claims of abduction?
I don't know. Nobody I interviewed had any firsthand knowledge on that phenomenon. I certainly believe people have experienced stuff like that. At least they believe it, because you look at Dr. John Mack, who's a Harvard-trained psychologist and psychiatrist, looked at the phenomenon of abduction in the 90s and early 2000s before his death. And he affirmed that the people he psychoanalyzed certainly experienced something real to them, but what is the abduction phenomenon? I really don't know.